This episode of Chi Life is going to be about the use of straight limbs within Qigong practices. Some people might be familiar with some practices where the limbs are straightened and some people might not, and we're going to talk about that and also specifically some characteristics of our straightened limbs as they apply to Qigong practice. So this is another one of those little technical detail vlogs. It's a topic that comes up occasionally, and I think there's probably a few people out there who'll be curious about it, and certainly quite a few people who it might help to inform their Qigong practice, so we're going to talk about it. Something that often happens in my experience in Qigong practice with different people is that often they've only been exposed to a limited range of Qigong practices, maybe just Qigong practices with one particular focus, and because of that, they then get quite confused about Qigong practices that are actually working in different ways and with different principles. I think I'll actually make another vlog about this whole topic, about how people often, they've only seen a small, very small section of Qigong practices, and then it becomes uncomfortable for them sometimes when they're exposed to other Qigong practices because they're unfamiliar to them. But one aspect of this is it's quite common for people to have only ever been exposed to Qigong practices that have a very yin focus within them. And within yin practices, it's quite common to use rounded shapes within the body, and particularly through the limbs. So very rarely to have the arms completely straight, to rather always have them rounded. Similarly with the legs, to not stand straight with the legs straight, but to often have the legs, so it's not just bent, it's gently curved and relaxed into that posture. And so everything in the body has these rounded shapes. And yes, so much so that, this is so common that some people think that all Qigong has to be done that way, and they see someone straightening their arm or straightening their legs and like, that's not Qigong, which of course is not true. It's not accurate. There's such diversity within Qigong practice, just in terms of different flavors and focuses and approaches. And there's also so many different aspects to our energy that using our bodies and moving in different ways works in different ways with. And so this is one detail, whether we have our limbs curved or whether we have them straight. This leads to different effects within our body, within our energy. So yin, in terms of some fundamental qualities of yin and yang, yin is soft, or soft relative to yang, therefore yang is hard relative to yin. So if we look, straight away at having our limbs soft versus, curved versus straight, even if you just look at the shape of a curve, often this tends to bring the idea of softness. Whereas if you look at something with straight lines, often we think of that as hard, and we can experience this within our body as well. When we form these curves, when we relax into a posture, a curved posture, naturally what happens is the weight of our body, the force of the weight of our body, sits out into the web of connective tissue that surrounds our whole body, our legs, our torso, our arms, and so on. And so if we're standing straight, and then we sink relaxed into a curved posture, you might feel the way there's this pressure outwards into the connective tissue right through the body. And this is a great thing to practice and to use within many Qigong practices, distributing that force out into the web of connective tissue and really filling. This creates a sense of fullness within the body as well, because the fluid inside presses out against the web of connective tissue, and so it feels like we're filling out against the shape of our body. And so these are both yin qualities. By contrast, when we straighten our limbs, the energy pulls inwards and it squeezes around the bones, around the hard tissues of our body, and so this stimulates them. So this is quite an interesting thing. Maybe you can try experimenting with this right now. You can follow along with me. Now, if you've practiced Qigong for quite a while, you're probably going to be able to feel these differences hopefully straight away, quite easily. If you haven't practiced Qigong for very long, it's quite subtle. It might take a little while before you can feel that, but because naturally as we practice Qigong, we become more in tune, more aware of what's happening within our body. So it's a subtle thing, but you can give it a try and see if you can feel this contrast. So have your feet shoulder width apart and just sink down. So let your legs naturally bend. We're not trying to force them to bend. Again, the idea is to sit down so they naturally bend, they naturally curve. As part of this, our knees come outwards. We don't fold them inwards. So our knees come outwards, we sit down, and we feel our weight sitting down into our legs, and we feel that pressure out against our legs. Our back is straight and upright. We open at our shoulders, right? So we don't have our arms in close by our body. We don't have them too far out. We create a gentle opening in our shoulders, so it creates a little space under our armpit. And naturally, if our arms continue to hang down, this now creates a curve through our arm. So we'll try this again. So feet shoulder width apart, sit down into your posture. Feel that pressure go out against the connective tissue around your legs. Feel yourself filled with that fluid pressure from within. Feel that pressure up through your torso, shoulders open, arms loose at the side with a gentle curve, and feel that pressure move out into the arms as well. Keep your neck nice and long too. Now we're going to contrast this. So from here, straighten your legs, straighten your arms. And then we'll go back sinking down, become soft and rounded. Feel that pressure push out against the surface. And then straighten your legs, straighten your arms, and feel how it squeezes in around the bones. And again, we'll alternate, so contrasting, sitting down, soft, rounded shapes. Feel the fullness, feel it press out against the surface of your body. And then straighten up. Feel the way it squeezes in around the bones. So we're stimulating our energy, stimulating the tissues of our body in a different way, and in particular with those straightened limbs, it's squeezing the bones more, it's stimulating those hard tissues of the body. There are some other contrasts in this as well, and this is that yin tends to gather and store, whereas yang tends to release and send out, right? And so this happens naturally within these postures as well. So as we sink down, we feel that fullness of the energy from within against the surface of our body, and we tend to then store that within. As we straighten up, it squeezes around our bones, and it tends to send the energy out through that straight line. And so sometimes those straight lines are really useful for sending energy out. If you think about this in the context of like a whip. So a whip is something that is very loose, you know, it's a fluid flowing shape. But at the point where it cracks, it's straight. It straightens at this point, and then it continues to flow past. And so the same thing, if I'm trying to release energy, maybe I'm dropping energy down. So my arms are loose, 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 nice and curved, but then they straighten just for a moment. At that moment of straightening, that's when it releases the energy, and then it actually continues back past and through. And so we drop down, and there's a moment where it straightens and there's this release of energy. So this is used sometimes even just momentarily within some Qigong practices where we're curved, but there's a moment of straightness which is used to release the energy. Other times it's used for a longer period of time, quite consciously, again, to focus the energy around the bones, or to send energy outwards. There are movements where, for example, you might straighten your arms out to the side and straighten your legs at the same time, and then relax back inwards because we're extending, sending the energy outwards. So if you don't, if you think it's not okay to straighten your limbs within your Qigong practice, you're going to have a hard time actually exploring and working with some of those other qualities of your energy, some of those more yang aspects and qualities of your energy. And overall, that will hold back your development. because if you know even a little bit about Chinese philosophy, you'll understand that yin needs yang and yang needs yin. They're not separate from one each other. They work together to support one another. And so we need to have yin to support our yang, but equally we also need yang to support our yin. We need to be able to work with both of these. So now some more details of what happens when we straighten our limbs, or how we should straighten our limbs, because this is another mistake. And I think this is sometimes where people have come up with misunderstandings about straightening their limbs, because they may have had a teacher who has said, no, don't do that. And it may not have been not to straighten the limb, but what we want to avoid is locking our joints. Yeah. So there's a subtle difference between just straightening and locking. So for this, I'm going to roll my sleeve up so you can see my arm more clearly and you can see the detail more clearly. I'll get a bit closer to the camera as well. And let's see, I'll adjust the angle here. And yeah, you should be able to see okay. Okay, so if I'm extending my arm to the side, sometimes it's really useful to straighten my arm. So at this point, my arm is basically straight, right? So there's different positions in terms of my fingers could be out, my palm could be up and so on. And my arm becomes straight, right? When it's straight, again, it's going to focus the energy more around the bones and it's going to create more of an outwards flow. This can be really useful in context for some practices. If I go just a little bit further though, so straight, and now I go a tiny bit further, locked. Locking can cause issues. Because now rather than just having a strong linear flow flowing out through my arm, when I lock, this creates an excess of tension around the joint. And what will happen, or what can happen, is as the energy flows through, it gets blocked and stuck here. And so it actually impedes that flow. So when we're generally speaking, I wouldn't say there's necessarily any complete universal rules of, never do this, because there's always different exceptions for reasons why you might want to do something. But generally speaking in Qigong, yes, often we will, certainly if we're doing yin practices, we will have rounded, soft limbs. But there are practices where we want to straighten our limbs. But when we do that, most of the time if we do this, we will make our limbs straight, but not locked. Because we're still focusing on the flow of energy and making sure that we have a healthy free flow of energy through. And coming to straight can be really useful. And it helps to stimulate the flow with some different qualities from when the limb is curved. But going just that tiny bit further and locking often then gets in the way, and the energy can become blocked in the joint and it becomes counterproductive. And so, I think this is where sometimes people get some misunderstandings about this, because maybe they've had a teacher saying, no, don't do that, don't. And maybe they've referred to straightening, where really it's don't lock, because straight is actually really useful in context for some Qigong practices. Now, of course, there's lots of others where specifically we do keep our arms gently curved as part of them. But yeah, sometimes also it's really useful to straighten those limbs. So hopefully this is useful for some people. Hopefully it's interesting as you explore different Qigong practices. So certainly within Long White Cloud Qigong, there's lots of practices that we do that have overall a yin quality to them. And so therefore they focus a lot on rounded shapes. But then there are some practices that have much more of a yang quality to them. And within those practices, you will find straight limbs. And then there are also quite a few practices that have a combination of both. That there's portions of movements or postures where the limbs have rounded shapes, and then there are portions or times within a movement where the limb becomes straight within it. But generally we won't lock. So we'll straighten, and we're changing the flow of energy at that point. But we want it to still flow. We don't want it to become blocked up through locking. All right, hopefully that was useful. Hopefully that was interesting. If you've liked the vlog, please like, comment, subscribe, share, all those good things. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one soon.